And our podcast is about integrating yourself, basically taking all the information that you ever get through training, through holistic points of view, to doctors, to whatever that comes into your way of being, and utilizing it into a way that it filters through you, not through giving your authority away,
Wise.
giving yourself the time to take in what you want and get rid of what you don't. Both Allison and I kind of came to that conclusion after taking many classes and finding that some of the stuff that we tried didn't work and some of the things we did work. And we kind of came to the realization most people have a problem taking that responsibility.
They have a hard time making decisions for themselves. And what you're touching on is something that I have to deal with a lot with my students and with my clients. And it's a big problem in the world. And that is things like believing what's written in a research paper or said by some authority. And inevitably you get patients that will go out and research something. Let's say you tell them to get off of gluten, and they'll come back with all sorts of scientific research saying why gluten's not bad for you. But if they keep digging, then they'll find opposing research. So very frequently students come to me going, I'm totally confused. I don't know who to believe. And I always tell them that's absolutely perfect. And I would think that this would be a great conversation to have as to why that happens and why the world's set up that way and what it means to the individual and what to do about it.
Yeah.
Welcome back to another episode of Integrate Yourself. We're your host, Allison Pillow and Maya Gottlieb. You can find me, Allison, at pureenergypdx.com, and you can find Maya at mayagottlieb.com. So today we are here with a very special guest and a person who is close to Maya and I's heart. He has been an integral part of our development in both mind, actually all three, mind, body, and spirit, through our path of coaching and training people in the gym, and emotional coaching and nutrition coaching. So we're so honored to have Paul Chek on the show today. He is, you're welcome. And, you know, I want to say, if you guys don't know about Paul Chek, just a little bit of background on him. He's an internationally renowned expert in the field of corrective and high performance exercise kinesiology. For over 20 years, Paul's unique holistic approach to treatment and education has changed the lives of countless people worldwide, many of his clients, his students, and their clients, by treating the body as a whole system and finding the root cause of a problem. Paul has been successful where traditional approaches have consistently failed. Paul is the founder of the C.H.E.K Institute, which stands for Corrective Holistic Exercise Kinesiology, and it's based out in California and San Diego, and actually Encinitas. And he also is creator of the PPS Success Mastery Coaching Program. And I just want to say, Paul, and when I said that in the beginning, I really meant it. Like, I feel like when I got when I stumbled upon your work, it was a big turning point for me in my life, both personally and professionally. So I want to thank you for helping me make that transition, because I think there was a lot of things that I really didn't even know existed before I came across your stuff and met you, of course. But I remember seeing, it was really actually by accident, because I was watching this TV show called Insider Training, and Gabriella Reese was on the show. You were on her show basically, and talking about this way of training. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was like, I want to train like that guy, and I want to learn what he's teaching. And so right after I saw that show, it really inspired me to go out and buy your book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And after that, it literally changed my life. I had really bad digestive issues. I was a mother of 2 young kids. And it just blew my mind. Like I'd never thought of, I've been an athlete for 20, I don't know, since I was 5, from like the age of 5 to 22. And I never really put together that organic food was healthier than conventional food. I didn't even know that was a thing until I read your book in 2006. So yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Well, I'm grateful for your thanks, and I'm grateful that the book and the other teachings I've shared have been able to touch both of your lives and all the people that you touch. I'm sure that whatever changes in you and whatever awarenesses arise in each of you end up being gifts to other people. So, you know, back when I began my career, actually, you have an old intro there. I've been at this for 32 years. And, you know, I started looking into a lot of things because when I left the Army, I was the trainer of the Army boxing team, and I did a 2-year, I was able to work with the team physician, an osteopath, for 2 years, learning to care for acute sports injuries, of which there was plenty on the boxing team. And we also were the headquarters for most of the Army elite sports teams. So the same gym and the same doctor were involved. And so I was involved in a lot of athletes' lives. And right off the bat, the coaches and the athletes recognized that I ate and lived very differently than they did. And I looked at the way they were eating and living and was just baffled that they could even perform at the level that they were at, because they were spending so much time working against themselves. And a long story made short, these awarenesses led me to becoming the trainer of the boxing team, which is how I got my career start. But while I was in there, the boxers and the coaches were baffled by one key thing. I not only fought on the Army boxing team, which you have to fight to get onto, and at that time was ranked as the 3rd best boxing team in the world. So it's not an easy thing. You don't just go and join. You have to prove your worth by taking out one of the best boxers in the amateur world, which I successfully did. But I also represented the Army in triathlon. So I trained for triathlon and trained full-time on the boxing team at the same time. The boxing team trained usually about 6 hours a day.
Oh,
Between
wow.
running, boxing training, calisthenics, weightlifting, etc., and technique training and sparring. So I was getting up early in the morning. The coaches let me do my own runs typically because I was much more capable than the boxers were in the running arena. I swam at our lunch break when we had a break in our training. And then I did my bike training at night after I finished my boxing training. And this went on for quite some time. So they were completely baffled at how I could possibly do all that training. And they were also very aware of the fact that I could fight hard for all 3 rounds, which at the time was a problem on the boxing team. Guys were petering out in the last round. And so my awareness that I'd gained from being raised on a farm and having a mother that's a yogi and a very holistic mother, and you know, everything we ate with rare exception came from our farm. My mom was very good at cooking and, you know, was heavy into juicing and all sorts of things. And actually the first book I ever read in my life cover to cover, because I was really someone that didn't like school and left the school. I only completed the 9th grade. The first book that ever caught my interest enough to get me to read it cover to cover was a book called Nutrition, A Holistic Approach by Rudolph Ballantyne, MD. And I was 22 years of age. And the day I finished the last page of that book, I was on an Army bus heading back from a 10-mile military competition it was a 10-mile race at the Pentagon. And I was on the Army's representative team. And I stood up and screamed, "What, you! I finally finished this thing!" And everyone looks at me and goes, "What the hell are you so excited for? The race is over." I said, "Oh, I just finished my first book in my whole life." And they all just cracked up laughing.
That's
awesome.
great. That's really awesome. Yeah.
So the kind of, that's a long way of saying that
Hmm.
from an early age, as an athlete, and then later as a trainer, and I also took over massage therapy for all the fighters, and that began my career as a therapist. I could see that the things that people were doing, if their life was looked at from the perspective of farming, would never work on a farm. If people fed animals and cared for animals the way they care for themselves, every farm in this country would die and the farmers would go broke. So I came into my work as an athlete and a therapist grounded in the basic but essential principles of how a farm works, and the principles of yoga. And my mother, being a self-realization fellowship devotee, sent me away to summer camp when I was 15 to work with monks and learn various meditation techniques, aside from years and years of temple meetings every week. So I had a nice grounding in consciousness development, and I had a nice grounding in work ethic. I had a nice grounding in the principles of natural living and farming and whole food eating. And so without having, when I read Rudolph Valentine's book, it was quite straightforward to me. He's quite heavy bent towards vegetarianism, and I'd already experimented with that too. My mother, being a yogi, was a vegetarian for a long time till it caused her problems. But when I was 12, she wanted me to be a vegetarian with her, and I did it for 6 months, but I became very anemic. And she eventually took me to a naturopathic physician who told me that this kid's anemic. You just need to feed him some meat. There's nothing else wrong with him. And I'll never forget the first time I ate a chunk of meat after 6 months without meat. It was like as good as a hit of LSD or something,
I bet.
And so that's just a little preface to what you were just talking about, to say that I learned, as complicated and technical and deep as my system of education is, and as you probably know, it takes about 7 years to do all the training I've developed, it really boils down to the very basic principles I learned as a kid on a farm.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, the biggest thing is you do give the fundamentals that most people don't get, maybe from a parent or a teacher or a mentor, unless you've had life experience to kind of say, well, have you looked at it this way? Because I think when I came to you, there's a lot of stuff that was, there to kind of really kind of test for yourself. And, some of the things that we did really just opened up new avenues of thinking. And
Yeah.
I look now back in my own refrigerator, and I'm like, the glass containers, how simple that is. And
Yeah.
some of those things, people get really easily. Some people don't, because then they have to prepare their own food, and that changes their whole life, and they fear that habit. But then they realize, after many years of eating foods that kind of just knock them down, sometimes preparing a meal is easier than going out to dinner. And I've always loved the fact that I can look back at many of the things I do now and go, oh, Paul Chek taught me that. So which is wonderful, because as time is going by, those are like I said, the fundamentals that we all need, and making things simple. So one of those tools can just change everything.
It's very important too, because the fundamentals that you're talking about really are, I'll say this in a way I hope it comes across clearly. When we're living with those fundamentals that I've taught you guys, which basically, the 6 foundation principles: nutrition, hydration, sleep. Those are the feminine principles: breathing, thinking, and movement. The masculine principles, which are expressions of 4 doctors: Dr. Happiness, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement. If you're living congruent with those principles I've just defined, not only are you more healthy and are you more vital, but there's a very significant chance that the money you are spending on a day-to-day basis is going into the hands of people that also share those values. And those values happen to be the values that make the earth itself sustainable. If a person's trying to save money on food and they're buying commercially farmed food, they're funding an industry that is radically destructive to the soil, to the environment, to the water, to the airways, contributes massively to the greenhouse effect. And the list is very, very long. So part of my teachings, you could say, the physical and the metaphysical elements of it are, my philosophy personally is, I won't get into too much because it might be too out there for people, but I reached a point in my life when I was about 22, I had a kind of a deep realization that I came here in this lifetime specifically to do this work, because I had done it many previous lifetimes. I've had many visions of myself throughout previous lifetimes, working as a physician a lot and a teacher a lot. And I came to the realization that I came here to do this work, but behind that was a deeper awareness. And the deeper awareness was that if people don't learn to get back to the basics and have a conscious awareness that all the choices we make and all the money we spend ultimately is either supporting the planet and the environment or destroying it, which means we are destroying our children's future. We're destroying our own future. And when you look at the rates of disease and the rates of suicide, we've got the most disease and the most suicide we've ever had in the history of human beings, yet we have more doctors, more therapists, more scientists, more dietitians and nutritionists, more strength coaches, more trainers per capita than we've ever had in the history of man, which to me means human beings have become so dangerously smart, they're making stupid decisions, and that they're lost and confused, and they believe and worship ideas more than they actually believe and worship the reality of the very experience they're having. For example, nobody becomes obese or even fat overnight. You have to work at it for months and months and months. Most researchers agree that it takes a good 10 years to develop a diagnosable cancer, which means you have to have committed yourself consciously or unconsciously to a disease-producing lifestyle for at least 10 years. But then people want to magically remove cancer overnight without realizing you don't remove cancer overnight, but what you can remove very quickly are the causes, the behaviors, and the beliefs and the choices that led to the disease. And once you start giving your body what you need, then you stabilize your hormonal system, your emotions become more balanced, your thought process becomes more clear, and your sense of connection grows, because when you're eating real food and noticing the changes in how you feel, it's like you're holding on to love or to magic, and all of a sudden you're interested in where it came from and what's the difference, because there's something very different here. And I think we're at a point, if we don't bring people back in touch with these basics, well, you know, right now, statistically, they say 1 in 2 people in the world population will die of cancer in their lifetime. I mean, how much further do we want to get?
Right.
Well, the other part that you always brought in was, and this was a great time from when I was meeting you, was the spiritual side. I was on my own journey of learning about that and doing yoga trainings, doing all spiritual travels, and learning about meditations and things that can bring you into your one self, and that intuitive part, which you talk about with the inner doctor, inner physician. And
Yeah.
that part that kind of came out for me was that you had a understanding of not identifying with the personality that you carry. So your behaviors, your habits can be changed. It's a
Yeah.
matter of learning what your values were. And I think that's kind of where you talk about it in PPS,
Yeah.
if I remember. Which was, you know, groundbreaking at the time for a lot of people. And there was some resistance in some people, but I think majority of the people kind of felt that there was another sense that we need to kind of grasp onto. And now you see it in a lot of the literature. Now you see it all over the internet, mind, body, spirit, balancing everything. And so for me, you kind of were the spearhead of bringing that to the topic in fitness and in the industry. And wondering, how do you see it now after so many years of when you first decided to just drop that bomb and let people realize that you have to focus also on that spirit of yours?
Well, you know, it's interesting for me, because I'm sure you guys are aware that I've pioneered a lot of changes in the health and exercise industries. I'm sure you know I'm the guy that introduced the whole concept of Swiss ball training to the gym. Prior to that, it was not a gym thing at all. You never saw a Swiss ball in a gym, and I've been in a lot of gyms. So in '88, I began bringing Swiss balls to gyms and was doing a lot of research and development. Released my first videos in '89. I pioneered the concept of food intolerance testing for exercise as important to identifying causes of inflammation, which leads to musculoskeletal health problems, organ gland health problems, adrenal burnout, cognitive disorder, and many other illnesses. I invented equipment for assessing the body to determine how to design corrective exercise programs correctly, objectively, and scientifically. That's been patented and used all over the world, and many other things. And, you know, I actually went through a period where I had so many Chek professionals, Chek practitioner professionals, that thought I was nuts when I started telling them about the importance of exactly what you were just talking about, because they were all trapped in scientific materialism. If you can't weigh it and measure it, it doesn't exist. And it was a bit challenging for me, because in my heart and soul, I knew I was telling them the truth, because these are not intellectual concepts for me. These are as real as breath for me, and I've lived them, and I've watched what happens when I don't live them and when I do, and when others don't live them and when they do. And so I ended up going through a few years where we lost a large number of practitioners because they simply weren't interested in anything but basically assessing people and telling them what to do, and keeping it at the level of kind of do this exercise, count to 10 and go to your next exercise. And they were a little more scientific because they had assessment skills, but what they were unable to participate with me in is the realization that oftentimes exercise is not being used in a way that's productive in that person's life either. And oftentimes exercise is an escape from the realities. For example, how many people are in the gym exercising all the time, trying to burn off the fat that they're creating and the water retention that they're creating from just making poor decisions, without realizing that you get a person who's adrenal fatigue and put them in a gym, they often get fatter and more tired, and then they push themselves even harder, and then they get an injury, and then they're really upset. And so they end up with a therapist who rehabs their back or whatever, but doesn't tell them anything about how they got it, or doesn't evaluate their weightlifting technique or their movement technique, and sends them right off back, and they just get injured again and again and again. And so, you know, for me, the real issue is that the human body is, if we just look at the human body as a material construct, right? The human body is made of atoms. The human body is made of water. It's made of things from the earth. It's made of air. We have to breathe. It's made of fire. There's nothing we could do to live without the products of the sun. Photosynthesis gives us plants, and animals eat plants, and the sun keeps us warm, and we have a solar plexus, which means sun plexus, that is the largest governing neurological body in our body. It has more neurons, some say, than the brain and the spinal cord combined, and it's regulating digestion and elimination, and in metabolism is very influenced. So if you just look at the things I've just said, the body is largely made of the elements called earth, water, fire, air, and it exists within space. But that does not animate the body. You know, a stone doesn't get up and dance and sing and do mathematical equations. And water is a passive principle. It follows gravity and does its magic, but it does it passively. It's not an active substance. Air doesn't do anything unless you do something with it. I mean, air is air. You have to breathe it or compress it or do something with it. And our metabolism, as mysterious and magical as it is, doesn't make decisions. You can use your metabolism to live like an idiot, or you can use your metabolism to become a saint or a sage. So what I'm leading to is there's obviously consciousness that exists within the construct we call a body. And the consciousness is capable of thinking abstract thoughts. Once a child reaches about 5 to 7 years of age, it's capable of abstract thinking. And then we get progressively more intellectual after that. We learn to work with ideas, we learn to work with symbols, we learn to work with concepts, and it gets more and more advanced. And we also have emotions, and I know you both as women know that emotions are actually more powerful than your mind. Your emotions can literally commandeer your mind and completely take it over. I mean, a good example of that is one of the any cop will tell you there's many men and women that kill their spouse when they are found cheating with someone else because the emotions outweigh their sense of common sense, logic, and trust for the justice system and everything else. So you get violent reactions emotionally, and we know that people eat themselves into diseases and eat themselves into obesity and even have eating disorders where they eat till they're sick and then vomit. And so you see the emotional element of it is very, very potent and powerful. As Osho says, you can cut open the dancer, the body, but you will not find the dance, the soul, or the spirit of the human being. And so it was so important for me to help people understand that the consciousness that lives in your body is what looks, sees, smells, hears, feels, and experiences. But the body is a vehicle, just like you get into a car to get somewhere, but you never think, I'm the car, unless you're psychologically injured. Our whole culture, literally to this minute, is still worshiping its body, not in a healthy way, but worshiping it in a way that they would worship their car. Make it pretty, keep it clean, put some bigger boobs on,
Yeah.
bigger dick on, even we
nice fender and all that stuff.
and jewelry and all the stuff. Yet meanwhile, they're not worshiping the fact that none of those things leave with you when you die. And I say to people, you can only be, when you die, all you can take with you is what you've become, and your body isn't what you become. You started off with the body. So for me, as a teacher and as a therapist and as a practitioner of meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, and shamanism, and having done, several hundred psychedelic journeys, very, very deep into my own psyche for my own analysis, and doing plant medicine ceremonies for healing for people and vision quests, I came to see that the body is kind of like the artist's paintbrush. The artist needs a medium to express itself, and our body allows the soul to express itself. And the way a good artist wouldn't want its paintbrushes used for putting tar on the road or as a jack handle for a car, because it would just make a mess of the tool. When we honor our body as an intimate vehicle of self-expression and realize that it manifests everything inside of our psyche as a reality that we experience, so that we can be aware of what we're creating, and that we have the power to do things like walk on fire and bend metal and bilocate and do remote viewing and things that a lot of people think are just airy fairy foo-foo. But there's people like me that do these kinds of things, and there's massive documentation on it. So the point is that the mind and the spirit can make the body do things that defy the laws of physics.
Yeah. It's beyond our belief or what we know.
Yeah, it is. And if you get trapped in the laws of physics, then you think your body's nothing but levers and pulleys and subject to the laws of gravity.
Yeah.
And you're now stuck in a materialistic paradigm that really doesn't lead you to any sense of long-term freedom. Because look, I'm 56, I'm almost 57. I'm still fitter than most 25-year-olds and stronger than most professional athletes. But I'm sure as hell not the guy I was when I was 35 or 25. And I've really enjoyed growing older. I've really, I like to smoke tobacco and herbs, and sometimes, I got a spot on my face. And I used to be a guy that worked his best to be the master of everything. And I found myself getting so worn out trying to be perfect for everybody that by the time I got to be 50 and went through a midlife crisis, I just said, that's it. I've really got to make my life more about art, creativity, having fun, and sharing my love, not trying to save the world and be some perfect guy for people. And then as, I think you guys know, I went through a year of vegetarianism under the guidance of my soul, and I lost a lot of muscle and I got a lot of criticism. I was still strong. I just couldn't put muscle on, but I don't listen to people to guide me. I listen to Great Spirit within, which is a soul. But I found that as I've aged, because of my spiritual practice, I'm not at all moved by the fact that I'm not as strong or as beautiful or whatever people think I should be or wanted me to be anymore. In fact, I feel fantastic because, you know, I don't need to conquer. I don't need to be a badass. I don't need to rush. I don't even need to save the world anymore. You know, my mom kind of gave me a sit down talk when I was going through my midlife crisis. And she said, you know, do you realize how much you've done for the world already? She said, if there's any man I know that could walk off into the mountains right now and just do whatever the hell he wants to do for the rest of his life, it's you. And I'm like, well, maybe there's some truth to that. But the bottom of what I'm saying is if I didn't have a relationship with my soul and I didn't learn how to connect to my emotions, but not be caught up in them, and to realize that my emotions were a source of information, but they're not a judgment.
Right.
They're not your identity.
Yeah, they're not my identity. It's like weather, you know?
Yeah, it's just giving you a signal.
Yeah, it's saying, hey, and it's also usually your emotions are actually the voices of fear patterns that we've developed in our pain body from past injuries and past people abusing us or stealing from us or whatever it might be. So, you know, I don't want a bunch of students that have nice looking bodies but can't get along in their relationships with their spouses and don't realize that coaching people is a very deep spiritual practice. I mean, if you can't get past the body, you're never going to be able to deal with the stress of why when you keep giving people good advice, they often don't follow it and keep doing the things that they complain about. And, you know, you have to reach that point of kind of, you know, my midlife crisis cracked the shell of yin open in me. And you know, and then when my son Mana was born 27 months ago, my God, my heart chakra just about exploded to the point where I was crying all the time. I'd be watching movies and I thought, my God, somebody's injected me with estrogen. You know, I'd be laughing and crying. I just had all this, you know, well, it was after that, but it was just, you know, all I'm saying is that I had to go through all these stages to allow that feminine energy to come through me, because I grew up as a tough guy and you aren't supposed to cry. And, you know, the only time guys are, it's okay. It's funny, you know, you can get into a boxing ring or a kickboxing ring and beat the living shit out of somebody. Then if you give them a hug and a kiss, everyone thinks it's fine. But if you go hug a guy and kiss him before you beat him up, then you're a complete weirdo in our culture. And that's,
or at a sporting event. At a sporting event, it's totally acceptable, right? But but you know, well, that's a great segue into what I'm wanting to ask you, Paul, and talk about is the balance between the masculine and feminine. And some of, you know, sometimes men, like you said, don't really connect with their feminine until midlife, or in a lot of women, including myself, really never connect with their feminine and kind of navigate life through the masculine until it just doesn't work anymore. You lose all your energy, or you get sick, you know, and I'm looking at, like, I think I've spent off and on probably the past 10 years trying to reconnect with my feminine and navigate life from balancing the two, because I can see the value in both so much and how they work together. But I feel like a lot of, and maybe we can talk about women and men too, but my curiosity is, you know, I know a lot of women too that really operate through the masculine mostly, and they have a really hard time connecting with their feminine and how to get them, how to find that balance. Like, what is your advice on getting started with finding that balance between their masculine and feminine? Because obviously their masculine is out of balance too if they're not connecting with the feminine within themselves.
Well, it's a very deep question. So, you know, I got to be careful about how far I go into the answer, but I'll try to just let soul talk through me here. The first thing we got to remember to begin this answer is we have to get clear on the concepts of the masculine and feminine from something other than this sort of elusive concept of the feminine and the masculine. Because if you're talking to a guy about expressing his feminine, he actually doesn't really know much of what you're talking about. He thinks, oh, you mean you want me to be a pussy?
Oh, right.
You want me to cry more? You want me to wear a dress? Well, screw you. And a woman, you know, if you say you got to express your masculine more, she might think you mean to act more like her big brother or her dad, or to swear more, or to go out and have, multiple sex partners and, things like that.
Yeah.
Or to take over a business and rule the world and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the feminine principle in Chinese medicine and Taoism relates to the principle of yin. And so the first thing that I want to say is that yin, by definition, is the form of energy that multiplies power. It concentrates its energy centripetally toward the center. When a woman gets pregnant, she goes into a full yin expression of herself, and she draws resources not only from the environment, but from herself into a center called the fetus, and actually grows an entire human body in her in 9 short months. And that human being can then go off and live potentially 100 years and have a huge impact on the world. Okay? So a woman's nature is to draw in. A woman's nature is to make connections. Everything that it takes to grow a fetus has to be looked at physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. She has to not only draw in the resources, but she creates the emotional, mental basis, or the architecture that influences the psyche of that child. So if you just simply look at what I've just said and say, now what happens to a woman who's working so hard, she's going to Starbucks and drinking double shots of espresso and triple shot lattes and soda pop and smoking cigarettes because she's under so much stress trying to live like a man that she has got to use those external sources to energize her, to motivate her, or to give her a little gift to herself because she's burned out. And so it actually dries her out. It diminishes her ability to have the moisture she needs to create the myelu for rehabilitation, growth, and regeneration of her tissues, or the generation of the baby's tissues. It stops her from connecting to herself because the more yang you are, the more outgoing you are. So I'll interject now that yang divides power. The sun is a very, very masculine star, and it radiates its power in every direction with pretty much equal intensity. So as the sun's doing that, the nuclear core of the sun is diminishing, diminishing, and diminishing. It has a shelf life of 10 billion years, and it's going to collapse and explode into a black hole, and it'll go full yin again and suck everything in for millions of miles around. But the point being is, a man's expression, or the expression of the male, is outward. He is going out to hunt. He's going out to build. Yang likes to cut things down. It's divisional. It's scientific. It's rational. It's logical. And the man wants to kick its kid out of the house so it can have some more sex with mommy. But mommy wants to bring things in. She wants to hold hands. She wants to eat together. She wants to sing songs. She wants to have time together as a family to connect. She wants her men to be close enough to the kids to actually father them, as opposed to building some empire and driving a Corvette or a Ferrari. And so these two polarities, they're complementary opposites, but we are so deep into a patriarchal culture that women actually, unfortunately, have come to the realization that because of many other problems that I don't have time to go into, and neither do you, but the psychological issues of the breakdown of our tribal society and the negative influences of religious programming, political programming, scientific program, we don't have a structure for raising children. There's a saying that says it takes a tribe to raise a child. We've lost our elders. We've lost balance.
That has a lot to do with how people don't know how to even to see aging anymore.
Yeah. No more rites of passage. No more.
No more vision quest.
No
it's
more
just
rituals.
all about money. It's all about money. Everyone's worshiping money and having more and being cooler and climbing this sort of invisible totem pole of status and rank, as influenced by movie stars and politicians and athletes. And so women not only are part of the world, but because of all the broken marriages, remember, the average person is married 3 times in their lifetime, and the average marriage today in the West only lasts 2.5 years. So it's safe to say there is a hell of a lot of women that are alone raising children out in the world. And there's a hell of a lot of women raised in broken families where men are out of control and women are scared to death. So the paradox of it is most women are enculturated into a way of living that's all about getting the job done, kicking ass, making money. And a woman today has come to the point where she says, as long as I have enough money, I don't need a man. And so what happens is they become, shall we say, a person in a woman's body with a man's psychological attitude about competition, kicking ass, making the money, getting the job done. And when you try to be a man in the work world, there's nothing left of you when you come home at night to be a woman. And now all our kids are being raised by babysitters, Game Boys, televisions, iPads. And so it's a complete and utter meltdown for the women. And it's sad, it's scary, because if we lose the women, well, we're all dead, period. The men will just kill each other.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of what you're saying reminds me of just this fear that comes with survival. Like most women now are coming into that, I better prepare myself because there's no one who's going to take care of me anymore. Because
That's exactly right.
The fundamental tribal aspect was that everyone worked together.
Yes.
But as competition has gotten deeper, because how we kind of construct everything, it is now this competition that has set us into this lane of even your closest person is your competition, the one that you're going to bed with at night. What are you making tonight? How much money did you bring in today? How much did you how many people did you save? Or whatever you want to compare it to, right? It's always about something I did better or you didn't do as well. And so when you talk about this, it makes me remember some of the Taoists about how conserving that energy. And so most of the time we're like banks that are keep extending out loans instead of letting ourselves have that bank account that's within. And energy is being dispersed totally. And
that's yang. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't need to go too deep in this. That's the part I was going to avoid, but you kind of set me up for it. So I have to kind of let the orgasm out.
You can try to blame it on me. That's okay.
No, I'm going to make a point that's critical. You see, what we're talking about has its roots in the Abrahamic religions. Christianity was very against women and very controlling of women. Judaism and Islam all made women objects to be controlled by men, objects to be feared, with the exception of the mystical branches. The mystical branches of all the world's religions are absolutely stunningly beautiful. But we're dealing with a problem that has its roots very deep in patriarchal religious ideology. And with the split of the church and science, we have never lost the religious influence over in politics. And what do politicians do? Every one of them that wants to get voted goes right after the religions and tries to get Christianity on their side or the religious people on their side. And so we've got this sick imbalance that comes from so-called religion, which really isn't religion. It's sort of it's corporate religion. It's money by membership, and scientifically proven religion's the most profitable business venture in the world, and the Vatican's the richest corporation in the world. So when religion became associated with controlling people for political agendas, you then had the coupling of contorted religious, because priests have always been afraid of women because they're afraid of their inability to manage their sexual energy, and a woman can make a man out of you. I mean, a woman's love and a woman's beauty and a woman's sexual, everything can just, she can get anything out of a man. She can get his secrets out of him. She can empower him to become a great leader, and she can turn him into, a ball of goop, a useless human being, by criticizing him, belittling him, or whatever. So when men in the priesthood had to come face to face with the power of women, it was easier for them to deny women and to control them and to downplay them. And that disease is still going on. And what I'm pointing out is because that very belief system and that behavior is so rooted in the culture of men about controlling women. And you're my wife, you do what I tell you to do, treating them like a hunting dog or whatever, even though they might not ever admit to that. Women have to mount up to that resistance. And so what happens is what should be a cooperative love relationship really turns out to be a family becomes more of a corporate venture that's competitive, and people start spending more money than they can make. So it gets to be a survival thing. And then you've got people that are now working so hard to keep up with the psychological programming that's induced to them to be a massive consumer all the time, that men and women spend far more money than they can afford to spend. And so they're burning themselves out trying to pay for credit card bills and iPhones and cool stuff that doesn't do anything but ruin the planet, extract too much resources, and leave kids without a loving, spiritual sense of connection to mom and dad. And research into adult attachment and infant development disorders shows the most common denominator when children have attachment disorders, which means they have a hard time connecting to their parents, or become rebellious, or get sick, or become violent. The number one cause of attachment disorders is parents who do not have a sense of direction in life.
Most of what you're saying is on such a level that maybe we could kind of swing into that spiritual side, making it a little bit about why isolation is the cause of the separational feel, and that way people are actually really kind of losing themselves to ideas, right? Like education. I even had this own epiphany of myself is that, I chased a lot of education, and I did it in a way to help me think that I was getting smarter, and I was getting away from being driven by other people's inputs. But actually, as I was seeking the education, I then didn't realize how often you have to discern what you're reading. You have to discern who's writing it. Mm-hmm. But mainly it came through a lot of the spiritual side of knowing that, your own self is that self. So when you kind of read something, it's speaking to you. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of bring an understanding of that, you remove parts of this isolation that we've come into play with our society. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experiences of these journeys that you've taken people on, the vision stuff that you've been working with, because now a lot of the science is showing how it's helping people get off of their major addictions. MDMA is now a therapy that is being highlighted a lot. I'm going to butcher his name, but his name's Garbo Mate, I think it is. And he's a big proponent. Ayahuasca has always been a big issue. Now on the forefront, psychedelics, mushrooms, and their ability to help. But, if we go back to when Ram Dass and some of the guys that started with LSD, it was forbidden. And a lot of people, were going to go crazy if they took it. But now people are really seeing how science is making headway with it. But I'm wondering what you think is kind of the drawback of relying on all these drugs. And I say drugs of psychedelic help, helping plant medicine, and still not integrating what happens when you take those drugs.
Well, that's, this is one of the reasons that I have a lot of qualifiers in place, and some people are in therapy with me for 2 years before I think they're ready for a shamanic or a medicine-based journey to open them up to other parts of themselves, because they have to be able to integrate effectively. And if you don't have the basics in place first, a rule that I have is if you can't handle your life without drugs of any type, adding drugs is usually going to complicate things significantly. The beauty of psychedelics is that in general, they're not addictive, but there's some real significant issues here. And that is that we have a problem in that we have a lot of people in our culture, probably about, I would guess 65% plus, that have never developed their own ego yet. And that might sound odd, but when you actually understand what an ego's function is, it's what Carl Jung calls individuation. It means I know who I am.
Right.
I know what my contribution to the tribe is or to the world is. I am in touch with my own creativity. I don't need someone else's approval to sing, to dance, to make love, and to explore. And I don't need to follow laws that I know aren't healthy, right? So this is part of the uprising that led to all the psychedelic uses.
And I think it also comes from parents who haven't allowed children to be their own authority because they were so afraid of how that, you know, we need to protect you. And then helicoptering, there's a whole bunch of additives in terms of what development stages got, you know, loyalties, things like that. So continue what we're saying, but I think that's another way to kind of see.
Well, this is part and parcel of what I mean when I say the grand majority of people have not fully individuated. They have not become a self. So, you know, one of the things that happens when we go through puberty is we start rejecting mom and dad's ideas. They say, don't play with drugs, we do. They say, don't have sex, we do. They say, don't stay out late at night, we climb out our bedroom window. They say, don't watch these shows on television. And basically everything they say not to do, those are the things we know for sure must be exciting or they wouldn't be blacklisted. But when you look at how many people are still in need of other people's approval to feel good about the way they look, to feel whether or not they're good enough at their job or their sport, or how many people, for example, I teach art and I'm an art therapist. The number of my students in classes all over the world that will sit and stare at a paper and break out into tears, sometimes 2 hours, because they're so afraid to draw. And I track that right back to a painful childhood experience where a school teacher usually, or a parent or a brother or sister belittled them for their art. And now they have no ability to express their creativity. And they're more afraid of putting something on that paper than they are, you know, getting their wisdom teeth pulled or their panty line waxed or some painful thing. And so what we've got is we've actually got a massive number of people that are afraid to be true to the inner voice and the natural creative urge to sing, dance, play. We've got a lot of people who are afraid to be alone because when you don't know who you are, you have a lot of other voices in your head. Most people's ideas are not their own. They're programmed into them from school, from religion, from parental figures. And the number of people who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who still hide pot from mom and dad, who still don't tell the truth about their sexual preferences. And this goes all the way up to the top in all political and religious and corporate circles. To be a whole person means first you have to be a person. And you need to grow into being yourself. And, you know, back to the issue of women, when women start taking on the persona of a man, they've departed immediately from being who and what they really are, which means that they're unconscious of the magnitude, the importance, and the beauty of the feminine principle of being a woman and the power of a woman and the beauty of a woman, and they're foregoing that so they can achieve some kind of corporate status or whatever it is that they're chasing after, whether it be fear-driven or otherwise. And so we really need, the psychedelics are very helpful when they're used correctly with proper preparation, proper environment, proper intention, and they can be very helpful for people that already have an ego but are basically doing too much in the world, or are maybe stuck in a way of living and relating, but they're having a hard time getting out of that rut. And remember, a rut is a grave with both ends kicked out. So that's what a midlife crisis is. You get to the point where you can no longer maintain the ego that you've developed. because an ego is inclusive of a collection of ideas. So on one hand, we've got people that are needing a life transition because they're resisting consciously or unconsciously the natural growth of a soul. But on the other hand, we've got all these people that don't have an ego and are still subordinate to other people's ideas, authority figures, and mommy and daddy. And for those, psychedelic medicines can actually be quite dangerous.
Yes.
Because the function of a psychedelic medicine is to basically make the ego highly porous so that the unconscious can come through and you can get access to your emotions. You can get access to more information about your connection to the plant world, the animal world, the elemental world, the stars. You can find yourself becoming one with everything. But becoming one with everything is essentially like going back into the womb and becoming one with mommy and one with everything. And so a person that isn't adequately developed and grounded in the responsibilities of contributing to life, contributing to society, contributing to family and culture, maintaining responsibilities, and being an individual can go into a state of such, shall we say, they can go into an eternal child archetype where everything seems so beautiful and all I've got to do is just love and worship God. So you get basically flower kids walking around doing nothing, but they can't maintain the state without more drugs because they don't have the discipline to do legitimate spiritual practices. And they differentiate a spiritual practice from their work or their school work or their responsibilities, which is an immature perception of spirituality. Real spirituality is alive in everything you do.
And I think on the other side of that is someone goes into trying to use psychedelics like way you just described, where they don't have an identity of self. And you destroy your identity of self when you're into psychedelics.
That's the whole point.
You become, but you also become very resistant when you come back into this reality that you are nothing but nothing. And when you can't really feel a part of you has gotten to understand your, whatever you're doing here, whatever you've kind of brought into this world, you are also taking out. So then that part of you can't say, who am I? And be okay with that question. And so a lot of what I notice with a lot of people who do take some psychedelics, it crashes them. And, you know, you can go through therapies and you can go through ways of talking about it, but it's, you know, that other parts of that we need is the part that, you know, you're kind of providing, and it sounds is giving people that structure of saying, look, take it a little bit more slow, find out who you are first, because you're not going to be okay with knowing you're nothing.
That's why
not going to happen.
That's why PPS Success Mastery Lesson 1, how to find and live your legacy or your dream, is critical, because until you've identified what your own dream is, you have not got an ego. You're living somebody else's dream. It's like they say in goal setting, if you're not working for your own goals, rest assured you are working for your bosses.
Yes.
So until you know what your own dream is, you're still just living out someone else's dream. And how many people are doing jobs and taking university training in various degrees or disciplines because their parents told them to do that and said, you'll never make it as an artist, a dancer, a musician, or whatever it is that they love to do. So their dreams get shut down by authority figures. And so, you know, I want to elaborate, Maya, you made the point. Who am I? You can ask that question in a psychedelic journey, but there's something hiding in there. The word I actually means a conscious center that has self-awareness. So until you actually have an I, a healthy ego, you can't answer the question because you still have not got enough sense of self-integrity to know who's asking the question.
Right.
You're just running software that you don't even know where it came from. And as I share with my students and patients, if you want to know whether or not you've actually got an I yet, let me ask you this question. If I could download every idea in your head about who you are, about what you do, about your relationships, about how you see the world, about math, physics, and all the things that are in your head onto a computer, and we could sort through them with a magical computer program and identify what percentage of those ideas are of your own authentic making, most people will be lucky if it's 0.5%. And the ego is often referred to as the selfplex. It's a network of ideas and associations that's really cognitive, other than the fact that you have your own body, which would be a biological expression of the ego. But the point that I'm making is someone who steps into the world and leaves home and becomes an individual and follows their dream. And remember, if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. They actually have the capacity to do something that someone with an ego doesn't have the capacity to do. And it's called novel thought, right? Art is novel. To paint, unless you're just looking at a picture of a farm or a barn or a cat and painting the cat, that's not that novel. But to sit down and express yourself, like to go on a dance floor and just let yourself move, is completely novel and spontaneous. But our culture is so don't act like a child, right? Well, we really need to be more like kids. And so we get so repressed and so trapped. But until a person's actually at a point in their own life where they come to the realization opinions are like assholes, everyone's got one, and most of them don't smell very good. No. And most of them haven't enhanced my life. And I'm now going to have to take responsibility for what I believe in, and I'm going to have to be brave enough to test things to see if it works for me. And, you know, not everyone likes chocolate cake. Not everybody wants to be saved by Jesus.
Right.
Some of us would rather burn in hell.
But you make a point about impact. I mean, and this is not just one realization for yourself to have, but it's an impact of knowing who you affect through the chain of what you do. Someone who's cooking your food or someone who's doing where you're buying your stuff. It's essential because even that makes them have to say, oh, I have accountability. I have some an understanding of what this is meaning. Like, I just can't go through life being afraid of taking that responsibility.
No, because that's not a child. That's a child.
Because responsibility got told to you that it was a requirement of this is stress, this is hard, this is work, you're not in instead of saying this is your ability to express yourself in so many different ways and define the stressors that you enjoy. And I love I always love the aspect that you created time and space in your workshops for people to sit and draw. Like that was like, you know, if we even go to the neurology of the brain and how much that impacts the brain in terms of the creative side versus the logistic side, you're actually doing a complex movement with one part of your hand, and the brain has to filter that information on the other side. And it just means there's so many neural inputs that you just don't even get on a certain layer. We talk about the cellular, we talk about all of it, but we really don't see that that is just your way of even communicating in a small microcosm.
Yes. Yeah. So can I bring up 2 quick points before I forget them? I mean, I did write them down, but I want to get them while they're hot. You used a very powerful word, Maya, responsibility.
It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. People, I think, take the word too far.
The word means response ability. It means the ability to respond. And if you are eating crap food, staying up late at night, watching shitty programming on television because you only live when you come home from work, and so now you got to medicate yourself and numb yourself because you haven't been living your dream. You've been doing what someone else told you to do or what you think you got to do to live a lifestyle that's not producing health or vitality for you, your kids, your friends, or anybody. To the degree you don't have 4 doctors and 6 foundation principles, your response ability gets diminished. And I'll tell you, it's a shitty time to find that you lack response ability when someone diagnoses you with a disease, because Your life has now got to change. You got to change the way you eat, the way you sleep, the way you drink, the way you live, the way you exercise, the way you think. And that's hard to do on a good day.
Yeah.
So when you're burned out and tired and got a pocket full of pills and think that the only way you can connect to God is with a bunch of mushrooms, your responsibility is almost nothing. So now you're facing a serious crisis. And a lot of people would rather just get drugged and cut without realizing that the drugs and the surgery never address the issue. They only address the symptom. And the lack of responsibility ties directly into all the things that we've been talking about with the importance of a healthy ego, because to have an ego means to be an adult.
Mm.
And I define an adult simply as someone who says what they mean and means what they say. And how far do you have to walk today to find one person who says what they mean and means what they say?
Far, and in an industry that is making it impossible for people to understand their own body, their own mind, their own spirit. And one of the things is that if you get into the aspect of what happens next, is aging scares the hell out of people.
Yeah.
That
Well,
part
it's a loss of connection with self. I mean, and again, like you mentioned earlier with art, sitting down, if you are sitting down there looking at a piece of paper, like I have been before in my life, I can totally relate to this. The first time I did it, because I used to love art when I was a kid, but sitting down and looking at the paper and like, I got nothing. I haven't connected with myself for years,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, like what is going on there? So that lack of connection, if you can't connect with yourself, you can't be an adult, but you also are going to be doing what other people tell you to do. It's just a vicious cycle, So
the suppression of creativity, in my observation, largely comes from fear of judgment
and self-judgment.
Yes.
Of self-judgment, but also other people's judgment. Both of them often live in the same house. And, the issue of fear of judgment clearly indicates that the child psyche still needs somebody's approval to feel good about themselves, which ultimately means to feel safe. As long as mommy and daddy love me, I'm not going to get a whipping. I'm not going to get punished. So whatever I got to do to get love, and if it's hit baseballs further, if it's get straight A's, every parent sets up the field of shall we say, how love gets rewarded in their household. And oftentimes they're just recapitulating the same sort of circumstances that were imposed upon them without realizing the very things that scared them as a child, and the same reason they still can't draw a picture, they're now imposing upon their child. And so we're at a paradoxical point in the evolution of man, because right now we need two things that are essentially, well, they're complementary opposites. Yeah. We need a full-on awakening to come into our individuality, because we need a lot of adults on deck to right the challenges that we're facing, to right the political system, to right the food delivery and nutritional, the farming, the soil, to make science moral instead of just putting shit out in there in the world that, the scientists don't care how big the nuclear bomb is or whether the microwave oven's bad for you or not. They just get paid to do research and pump garbage out there. But the point that I'm making, and it's a critical one, and it's really like a firewalk we're on right now, because the world can't take the weight of this consumerism, capitalism, war, genocide, silliness, and destruction by science long before we're going to have a major, major meltdown. And so the paradox is we all need to step into our individuality fully, because we all have to contribute. We have to step up on deck. We not only have to contribute, but it's going to require the creativity of every genius we've got to solve the problems. And we've got to start using technology for important things. And the paradox of it is we have to work together like ants or bees. And as my second chakra or first chakra power animal, the bee family, said to me one day when I was a bit stressed out and I was asking for help, they said, Paul, no bee can make honey alone. And we paradoxically need to step into our individuality, become healthy individuals, but hold hands and move together with the spirit of what's really important for the planet, for our children, for life, for love, for creativity, and for life itself. And so as a human culture, we've brought ourselves to a point where we're facing a great challenge that's the most amazing opportunity that you can even imagine. And that is, we now have the chance to really become who we were destined to be as individuals, but also have tremendous love, support, and celebration for the fact that there's nobody better to share with and to partner with and to do things with than someone you can rely on, because they're reliable and they know their life depends on the same things yours does.
I love that. And on top of that, I kind of feel like you talked about this earlier in the show, is that basically when you had your realization of not being so serious, really taking that down a notch and realizing you're not a one-man show, that you don't need to be doing this all by yourself is important, but also not to take everything to the detriment of stressing this one unit out. Like you got to let that clown out. You got to let that joker out, the part of you that really can just have fun. I remember years ago, you did a video of, putting face paint on your face and kind of dancing around and making a fool of yourself in a way that makes it really understand that as much as all of this we talk about, as much as how important it is, there is a layer of just letting go and saying, hey, let's all have some fun too. Like keep your awareness there, but also keep an awareness that you can't take it serious. You can't take it with you to the grave. You don't know what's going to happen in the end, but we all can help each other.
Well, this sort of draws me back. I don't know if you've read or listened to the book Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna.
Oh, Terence.
Yes, but so Terence does a very good job of chronicling the use of particularly mushrooms and celebrations at the new moon that were done for thousands of years amongst the pagans and many natives. You have the peyote, you've got all sorts of native rituals. But what he highlights very, very importantly, and this is before the kind of the agricultural era, which is what brought in patriarchy and control, by the way. I won't go into the whole background on that, but Ken Wilber talks about it extensively, and so do others. But basically what he was showing is that on every lunar cycle, we got together and went out into a field somewhere, and we ate mushrooms in a ceremony. We danced, we sang, we had wild, passionate sex, we painted ourselves up, and we just had a full-blown party. But the caveat is the psychedelics dissolve the ego barrier so that you come into connection with the world, with life and each other, and realize once every 28 days your oneness with everything else, so that the ego doesn't get, shall we say, over glorified or too rigid, and you don't lose this sense of separation from nature. So really, if we could if we could convert Christianity to a religion that followed those types of situations and have people properly prepared for a monthly ceremony like Santo Daime and some of the native cultures did, we would see a radical transition of this planet and a radical transition in government and science and everything else. And the scientist's head would be blown right open. I mean, there's nothing better for novel ideas than a good psychedelic journey. And we would go back to the worship of the earth. We keep this religious, largely Christian idea that we're here to control the earth and to conquer nature and to use it to our own devices. And we think because we've got rocket ships that we're just going to escape to the moon or Saturn, which is so infantile and so dangerous of a concept, especially when you're spending billions of dollars a year on research to go to some other planet. Well, the soil is dying. Well, the water's poison. Well, the air's poison. I mean, It's a ridiculous concept. But if we actually came to the realization that to love and worship the planet as our mother, the source of our ability to be at the party. Look, this is a party where you got to have a costume. We call it a body, right? There's lots of people at the party, but until you're as developed as someone like me is to see them all, you can run the very dangerous risk of being on a planet with almost 7 billion people and feeling completely alone and thinking there's nothing after this. But once you heal yourself, spirit always shows you what you're ready to see. And seeing God is not nearly what people think it is. You know, I'll quote Isaiah 45:7. I create the light and the dark. I create good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. And we've got this very infantile view that God is just this loving something. Yet, meanwhile, we say God is this loving something. We're afraid to burn in hell. But the point that I'm making is really beautifully encapsulated by Carl Jung, who said all religious systems are designed to protect you from the direct experience of God. Ego.
All right.
You cannot objectify God. You can't, like, I can say here, I'm holding up this cup. It's brown. It's got spiral patterns on it. I can objectify the object for you. And even if you couldn't see it, I could describe it in a way that you could imagine exactly what I'm talking about. But because God is no thing, yet everything, you cannot, people do in religious circles in the Bible and say this is what God wants. You can't know what God wants till you become God, and you cannot become God and still have a self, because God is the source and the sum of all. Therefore, at the level of God, there is no I or thou. It is just pure oneness. It's pure awareness or pure consciousness. And the experience of merging into complete annihilation of the ego or oneness with all that is. Imagine if I was to say to you, Allison or Maya, I am going to put you in the stretcher and I'm going to stretch your body till it's as big as the universe. Well, just the thought of that would scare the hell out of somebody. I mean, within 2 inches, your shoulders will be dislocated. So the ego has got to deal with quite a shock. And then people have to realize that a lot of the things that they think are evil and terrible, God's as invested in those as God is in all the love and the goodness, because those two make each other real, just like north and south make each other real. So when you enter into a state of God consciousness or God union on a psychedelic or in Tai Chi or otherwise, I mean, look at all the problems people have with Kundalini rising. My God, I've got several books on it, and I've worked with piles of them who, using natural approaches, get into some serious challenges when consciousness starts rising up high enough that it explodes the ego. So, you know, God cannot be defined as an object. It can't be defined with words. But the beautiful way of describing God that I think's really lovely and comes from Christianity, which is one of the reasons I love it, because I quote it to the Christians. When people would ask St. Francis of Assisi, what is God, or how do I find God? He would say, what you are looking for is what's looking. Mm-hmm. And when you realize that this is God experiencing itself, and God is open to experiencing everything fully, and every one of us is a 100 complete novelty. There will never be another Allison. There'll never be another Maya. There'll never be another Paul Chek. Your fingerprints will never exist in this universe a second time. God's into novelty. God is the great artist that creates stars, moons, planets, and it's all beautiful. But paradoxically, God's as willing to light its art on fire as it is to worship it. And that takes tremendous reverence to have that level of love, joy, and creativity, but that level of detachment is the ultimate spiritual achievement. And so what I'm really trying to outline here is that if we just focus on our dream, what is it that we really want to enjoy? Do you want to travel? Do you want to make love? Do you want to dance, sing, paint? If you make your life oriented around doing the things that fill you with life, then you're alive. And when you're alive, you have energy. And when you have something you love to do and your back starts to hurt or your concentration isn't working so well, you're willing to figure out what's stopping me from seeing clearly when I paint, what's stopping me from lifting weights, what's stopping me from weeding my garden. And then your heart brings you to an Allison or a Maya or a Paul or a Chek professional or someone that enlightens you. And so as we all grow into our mastery and into our honesty and into our love and creativity together, paradoxically, we are inspired to go deeper and deeper, and we all have more and more in our cup to share with the guy next to us. So next thing you know, you say, well, I'm really into crochet or making quilts. Well, shit, all of a sudden, you're got a new client on your schedule. You say, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm a quilt maker. Oh, really? Oh, here, would you like to see my website? Oh my God, your quilts are mind-blowingly good. And so what does the universe do? You think it's just a client, but paradoxically, the client's paying you to get over their back pain or get rid of their tennis elbow. And meanwhile, they're saying, oh, if you'd like to come over, I'll show you some of my quilting techniques or painting or whatever it is. So you see, when you get out of the way of love and you focus on living and sharing your love and your wisdom and being open to being honest with meeting your needs and knowing that we have to create a way of living that's sustainable because the world can't take it. And the fact of the matter is right now, hardly anybody on this planet knows what to do in nature. Yeah. They don't know what to do without supermarkets. They don't know how to plant. They don't know how to harvest. They don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to protect themselves. Look, I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division, was raised on a farm and lived on Vancouver Island and spent time in the woods and gone for long time periods in the mountain hiking. And I have some survival skills. But most people, if the power goes off for 3 days, the world will be a complete disaster. If a solar flare happens and it knocks out our electronic systems, which NASA says is we're due for, the world's going to be mayhem. I say we really need to stop depending upon external devices and get ourselves back in touch with the earth, back in touch with eating together, singing together, get rid of our racial, ethnic biases, and know the world's big enough for all of us to party and to share and to grow. And when all of these things are looked at as art forms or ways of expressing themselves, you don't need to go to war against somebody because they like a different kind of art or a different kind of sex with you. You just simply acknowledge that that's their cup of tea. And we can all do it together. We can all exercise together. We can breathe together. We can farm together. We can share together. And when we get to that mindset, then the women actually can celebrate being women. They can celebrate their menstrual cycle. I mean, how many women have a regular menstrual cycle today? I've coached hundreds of world-class athletes and business women, and I can't count the women on one hand that I know that have a regular, healthy menstrual cycle because they're so yanged out, burnt out, single mothering, chasing money, trying to have a ripped body and look like a guy. And look, when the women in the world are that far gone, you have lost your connection to family, you've lost your connection to the earth, you've lost your connection to intimacy. I mean, the list of the problems that creates, even in Native American cultures, many Native American cultures were not monogamous because they didn't feel it was healthy. But once a woman was pregnant, a man was not allowed to get her pregnant again for 3 years. And if he did, he might get kicked out of the tribe because if a woman got pregnant too frequently, it often caused them to die or to get very sick because it depleted them too much.
Right.
They didn't want women getting pregnant more than once every 3 years. So they had freedom for sexual partners. They had awareness of the women, and all Native tribes knew that men are expendable, women aren't.
Talk about a little bit, I know we're getting close to end, but I want to know, maybe the listeners may want to hear what your ideas of men, though, in terms of the men and what's happening to them.
Well, what's happening to men is Well, everything that's happening to the women is just happening in the men all the time, right? They're just emulating the men. So all the things we've said about women and their problems and the masculinization of women is what happens when a man, but what's happening to men is they're dangerously caught in a mathematical, logical, scientific, materialistic mindset as a general kind of, stereotype. Men are very much, if you can't weigh it, measure it, and prove it, it doesn't exist. So men have really lost touch at large with their connection to the earth and their connection to women. So the gap between men and women is getting wider, because as women become more like men, obviously the polarity is diminishing. And so now women become objects of competition, not objects of relationship and love. And men, you know, the gay movement's getting bigger and bigger. And I really believe that the gay movement is important because it's showing that men are actually being brave enough to love in ways that work for them due to the circumstances of their upbringing and their psychological conditioning and the challenges they've had to face with women. Oftentimes their mother is behind some of this. But the other thing is you can have sex with a man all you want and he's not going to get pregnant. So one of the feelings I have is that the gay and lesbian movements are both taking heterosexual relationships into a camp that's allowing lots of sex without pregnancy. Because if we keep popping out children where the world can't take it. We don't have the resources for everybody, and using the current systems that we have. We do have the resources if it's done intelligently, organic, biodynamic farming, and management of other things. But I think that what you're seeing is men are actually burning out earlier and earlier and earlier. Athletes' careers are not getting longer, they're getting shorter. And I work for many professional sports teams. Look, I've got 18 and 19-year-old men emailing me, asking me how to get off of Viagra.
Oh, wow. I believe it. Yeah, I've heard that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, when I was 19, my penis would get so hard you could use it as a dinner bell all by itself. And I got 19 and 20-year-olds who can't get an erection without taking a drug. I mean,
it's serious.
It's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big.
What's happening? Here's a summary of what's happening to men. They're being forced into yang. I mean, into yin. Sorry, into yin. But look, if you light your garden on fire, what you end up with is ashes. When you light a man on fire, you end up with ashes. Ashes refertilize the soil for the next crop. So that's the yin and the yang. Men are burning themselves out. So they're being forced into a yin experience with chronic injuries, with health problems, with ailments, with broken relationships that force them to be alone and go into themselves to try to figure themselves out. In other words, they're taking the hard road to finding their feminine and having to learn how to take responsibility for nurturing themselves, which they don't have to do if they just grow up and understand that to be a whole human being means to access the feminine and the masculine, and the women need to learn to access the masculine in a healthy way too.
Right.
So the men are basically burning themselves out, and you see the shapes of their bodies. They're getting heavy into plastic surgery, just like women.
Well, is it for women, the masculine for women is more about self-worth and confidence. And so, you know, if you don't have
it's about survival for the women. I think it's survival.
But I mean, but you don't want to be in survival mode. Like that's not how you really. But you see, it's survival in a sick culture. It's survival in a culture that worships money, status, and success. But as what Maxwell Maltz says in the book Psycho-Cybernetics, success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you get. So we've got a lot of women in the world that are chasing success, but only when they're got endometriosis,
their back falls apart, their relationships fall apart. Do they figure out what it is that they really want to get?
Yeah. And that's usually a little bit more time on the earth when they really start to understand how wonderful it is. And then that fear sets in. And hopefully with your help and us keeping the light on, basically showing them ways to kind of bring themselves back into themselves and centering, we really are changing the world. And we really appreciate your time. We find that every time we talk to you or see you, it just brings back great memories and appreciation. You fill us with lots of gratitude. So thank you for doing what you do. And we're glad that you have released yourself from being the only person who has to keep working so hard. We're behind you.
Yeah.
Well, you know, part of that is just that I felt I know enough about many sciences, about earth sciences, health sciences. You know, I've studied very intensely my whole life. I understand physics, quantum physics, mechanics, you know, all the basic sciences. And I came to the realization that we're running out of time before we completely collapse the planet. And the planet basically will do fine without us, but we can't do without her. Right. And so when you have as much knowledge as I do, and you care about life and people, it can really light quite a fire under your ass. And, you know, it took me a lot of deep spiritual practices to find that very kind of tightrope balance of realizing the world isn't something you can save, but it's something you can share your love with. And that God loves all of it, even the problems, because that's how God experiences God. And I reached the point where I just simply came to the awareness that it's good to do what I can do each day out of love for people, love for life, and love for the rest of myself. But it isn't healthy to torture myself to try to rescue the world, when really the world is a process of creativity, and it is a process, right? You can't rescue the process. You can only contribute to it. And I think the best thing any of us can do is to live true to the principles we're talking about, because the most powerful teacher is the silent teacher, and the greatest lover is the silent lover, which means everybody's watching, right? Everyone's watching. If they look at you and they see a happy, vibrant person, they want to know how you do it. And if they notice that you got a great ass and a nice smile and your hair looks good and you're buying organic food, then they think, maybe if I eat organic food, I'll look that way. And they go to the gym and they see you exercising differently than everyone else, and they have this urge to talk to you. So, you know, I reached a point in my own development where I just said, look, I've got to do what I can do out of love every day, but I've also got to do that much for me, or I'm actually playing the same game that burns the women out and fries the men, and I'm trying to help them get out of it while playing the same game. So it's kind of like a gay man teaching Christian classes on the importance of heterosexuality. It just, it never really goes very far. You're eventually going to get caught.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, Paul, thanks again. And yeah, we wholeheartedly really appreciate you being here. And why don't you, if you could share with everybody how the best way to find you. I know you have a great YouTube channel with wonderful videos on it. You have like a weekly blog, is that right? Or
yes, my blog is on Paul C.H.E.K blog.com. That's Paul Chek's blog. It's C.H.E.K, as you guys know, but most people put a C.H.E.C.K, then they can't find the website. So C.H.E.K blog, youtube.com/Paul Chek Live. I've got over 500 videos, and they're not fluffy fast food education. Some of them are an hour or more long, and I get into all the kinds of things we're talking about and much more. Chek Institute, CHEK Institute.com. We've got a beautiful blog there, lots of information, articles, audios, online courses, workshops, advanced training programs, PPS Success Mastery Training lessons. You can join the PPS program, and even with one lesson, you can get on the coaching calls. I have over 500 hours of recorded coaching calls that anyone that's a member can listen to. And so those are the
Instagram. What's your Instagram?
I don't know what my Instagram is. I have to be careful with all that because it's very easy to get lost in all that. But I do have one.
That's okay. We'll find it for you.
But maybe I've got a Twitter, a tweeter, a twatter, an Instagram, a Yahoo, a Woohoo, and fortunately, there's people that handle all that so that I can live.
Yeah. Well, right. And the important part is that you have your classes that all your practitioners teach, as well as you teach. I think you teach some classes still, right? At the C.H.E.K Institute, and they're all over the world. Yeah, and they're offered all over the world. So not just in the United States, but Australia, New Zealand, places like that, right?
Canada, everywhere, like all over the place. And also my Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which is really for the average individual out there to get healthy, and teaches the principles in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, but even more carefully broken down and guided with some extra material, integrates some of the 4 doctor concepts, teaches you how to use movement to charge your body up with work and exercises. So HLC1 can be done anytime, any day, anywhere with internet connection. Right online, and it's a beautiful course designed for the average individual out there. And a lot of people have had life-changing experiences with that. Even professional athletes have told me it changed their life.
Yeah. And you also, I think, are wearing one of your pieces of art. I think is it your mandala?
No, it looks like one of mine, actually. It's strange. When I first saw this shirt, someone gave it, I think Angie gave this to me as a gift, but when I looked at it, I went, oh my God, did she get one of my mandalas? Because I actually painted one that looks so much like that, I thought it was my mandala.
Yeah. But you also have art that you put in your blogs, but I'm not sure if you have it in anywhere else you present it, but you really kind of talk about what that means, and there's some great symbolism for you. Yeah. So, and those are accessible too for people to see and to kind of figure out what they want to do with their creative sides in your information. But I wanted to say, I always wanted to do this, but I never got the time to do it, was to make a t-shirt that said, check me out.
Yeah.
With the C.H.E.K. Yeah, so maybe one day I'll send you a shirt, or maybe someone does it before I do, but I always like that. And I thought, gosh, I wish I'd just get the chance to tell them about that.
I think it's your creative impulse. You got to do it, and I'll be waiting to wear it.
I'll send it to you. Maybe you can put one of your mandalas on that. How about that?
And I'll write one that says, check me in.
Love it.
Check me into Allison's and Maya's podcast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Wonderful to see you again.
All right, you too. And thanks for all the great stuff you're doing in the world. And it's just beautiful to me that I have practitioners like you guys all over the world now that can really help these people. And that's a good point to share on the podcast, is people can find CHEK trained professionals just like Allison and Maya. Right on the C.H.E.K Institute homepage, it says find a practitioner, I believe, on the top of the website. Yes. And so there's a lot of them out there, and they're doing great work. And I love you guys, and I won't keep you any longer, because otherwise we're going to start talking about God or religion, and I'll never.
Well, we love you too, Paul, and we really appreciate you in every way. So hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime soon, or see you.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. All right, Paul. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.